Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chantal Freeman, and I'm the Senior Assistant Director of the Office of Online Engagement, and I will be one of your facilitators this evening. So joining me in facilitation is my colleague, Becca Lazinsk, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement, and we're both honored to be with you here for this Global Days of Service community panel focusing on topics of environment and environmental justice. So before we have the pleasure of introducing you to tonight's excellent panel, we would like to just review a few housekeeping items for the session. So microphones and videos have been removed for participants just to reduce any background noise. There is a Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen, which will be present throughout the presentation should you have any questions. And we'll aim to carve out some time at the end of the session's panel to get to a few of your questions and thoughts. Tonight's panel, including the Q&A, are currently being recorded, but there's no obligation to type or ask questions for participation in the session. And due to the nature of the topic this evening, please be advised that sensitive situations and content may be discussed. And we'll also note that Becca and I are not experts in the field, and our panelists all have varying experiences. So tonight is intended to be an inclusive learning experience for all. And we're looking forward to learning with all of you. And please keep an eye out at the end of our session for our feedback survey, which we would really appreciate if you could complete to let us know your thoughts on tonight's session. I would now like to take a minute just to share our online accessibility statement with you all, which serves as a reminder of resources available for students. Your experience here at Southern New Hampshire University is important to us. It is our policy and practice to create an inclusive and accessible learning environment. If there are aspects of this event that present barriers to accessibility, please notify the Online Accessibility Center at oac@snhu.edu or by phone at 866-305-9430 or at the Campus Accessibility Center at cac@snhu.edu or by phone at 603-644-3118 as soon as possible. Please provide at least 1 week in advance notice to coordinate event accommodations. So as you all know, this panel is brought to you by SNHU's Global Days of Service, and I'll toss it to Becca to give us a quick overview of Global Days.
Thank you. Global Days of Service is an initiative by the Office of Alumni Engagement. Traditionally, we're used to getting together in person, but since we couldn't do that this year, we pivoted to having a service movement focus from February through May, with each month taking a closer look at a specific social issue. Our goal is to strengthen communities across the globe and bring students, alumni, faculty, and staff together to help. We're offering educational sessions, DIY project ideas, community resources, and spotlights of SNHU community members. There's definitely some availability for April for you to still get involved, and then May will be our last month as we focus on the pandemic's essential workers.
Great. So April's focus for service and education, as you all know, is on the environment and environmental justice topics. And in order to frame the conversation tonight, we just felt it was important to define the umbrella term of environmental justice, as well as provide a quick overview of what some environmental awareness topics are that could nest under environmental justice. So as defined by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respects to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. This goal will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from the environmental and health hazards and equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. And again, here are some environmental topics that could nest under environmental justice. So we have pollution and toxics, so chemical use, exposure studies, hazardous waste, and plastic in waterways. Greener living, which relates to all sustainable living choices. Air and water quality, so thinking about emissions and drinking water safety, as well as watersheds and rivers. And then science, so research tools, methods, and opportunities there. So we're fortunate to have 3 panelists with us this evening from the SNHU community who will share with us their connections to working with the environment, talk about their experiences in the realm, and also provide ideas on how people can get more involved themselves. So if this is your first time joining us for a panel, welcome, and you may be new to the structure, but Becca and I will be facilitating questions to our panelists, interview style. So panelists will make sure to call on you so that you know who we'd like to address the question first, and you'll all have the opportunity to answer. And as a reminder, as we're hearing from our panelists, feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask questions and share reflections as they arise. So first up here, we have Kaitlin Sampson. So Kaitlin is a graduate of the SNHU Hospitality Business program. After receiving her bachelor's degree, Kaitlin worked for Marriott International until 2018, when she received a Sustainable Innovation MBA from the University of Vermont. She currently lives in Vermont and works with the Sustainable Food Lab, a nonprofit working with food and beverage companies and the farmers from whom they source.
I am thrilled to introduce Majidzadeh. I hope I got that kind of right. I hope that you will correct me if I did not. Hamed joined the science faculty at Southern New Hampshire University in 2019. Previously, he served as a coastal environmental quality program specialist for the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium. Prior to that, he was a postdoctoral research associate at Clemson University, as well as a research assistant at Clemson and Auburn University. He earned his Ph.D. in Biogeochemistry from Auburn University in 2016.
All right, and last but not least, we have Samantha Stabner. So Samantha is a graduate of the SNHU Hospitality Business program, a senior captain of the women's soccer team. She also represented SNHU and the New England 10 to the D2 Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Samantha worked for the Worcester Bravehearts, Creedon & Co. before returning to her true calling in agriculture. For the past several years, Sam has ignited her passion as the fifth generation at Whittier Farms, filling roles in sales, marketing, events, animal care, equipment operation, and vegetable production, all while staying true to the family's dedication for sustainability and stewardship. Samantha serves as the Vice President for the Agrimark Cabot Creamery Cooperative Young Cooperators Program. And as a generational farmer, Samantha is extremely proud of her work with her husband, her parents, and her siblings to keep agriculture alive and well in Sutton, Mass. It's great to have you all with us tonight. And with that, we'll start with some questions.
Awesome. So I have the first question for the night. If each of you could start by telling us about yourself and your work. What organizations are you involved in, professionally, volunteer? How long have you been involved? What really connects you to this topic? Kaitlin, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm just so happy to be with the SNHU family and talk about this topic. Again, my name is Kaitlin Sampson. I use she, her pronouns. I grew up and currently live in Vermont. So I grew up spending a lot of time outside. And I knew, at a young age, I was interested in the environment. And during my time at SNHU, realized that it was sort of a passion of mine. I've worked for the Sustainable Food Lab now for 3 years. And in my role as a program manager, I help direct a number of projects that create a more sustainable food system. So bringing together different stakeholders throughout the food system to create pre-competitive collaborations, learning and sharing of best practices.
Thank you. Hamed, can I go to you next? You're on mute, my friend.
Here we go.
Every day.
Every day, yeah. I'm Hamed Majidzadeh, an assistant professor of environmental science at Southern New Hampshire University. I teach courses related to environmental science, and the main focus of my research is in areas related to water quality. In particular, I study impact of disturbances such as hurricanes, wildfire, and urbanization on water quality. I also serve as a board member at Merrimack Watershed Council, which is a nonprofit organization in New England, trying to monitor water quality in Merrimack River and Merrimack watershed.
Thank you. Samantha?
Sure, come off the right way. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So yeah, I'm a fifth generation farmer. I came back to my family's farm after my time at Southern New Hampshire. I grew up in the tractors, in the fields. We have a farm store, so we've always been connected directly to the consumer, which is unique to our area, pretty much unique to New England. And if anybody's listening from other parts of the country, the more rural, you see a lot more commercial agriculture, where it's a lot of wholesale markets. But New England is extremely unique in our access to the population. And for our family, we've been just working on that by proving how sustainable farmers are, both with regards to the environment, but also the generational sustainability in order for our family to keep doing this. So now I kind of have roles in kind of the fill-in roles. Whatever needs to happen during the day, I can help make it happen. Might start in the retail store, jump on Facebook for our social media or Instagram, and then like tonight, I finished my day in the greenhouse transplanting seedlings.
Do a lot of different things, and we appreciate all of you making time with how busy you are and how much work you're doing to still make time for this session. So thank you for that. And I'm going to toss it over to Chantel.
Yes, thank you all for telling us a little bit about yourselves and your work. And so the next question would be, some of you alluded to this a little bit, but thinking about sort of what, first interested you into jumping into this field, right? So there's a lot of different areas actually among you, right, that you kind of work in, but and are passionate about. So I'm thinking, what were sort of some of the initial drivers to get to you like where you are right now, in terms of there's a lot of different directions that you could go in terms of thinking about helping the environment. So what are the spaces, I guess, how did you get to where you are? So thinking back for that. So Hamid, would you like to kick that one off?
Sure, I'll be more than happy to. Well, as a researcher, I've been dealing with questions related to environmental issues since 2010. At the time, light emitting diodes, LEDs, were a new thing, and we were trying to use them as a source of light in water treatment reactors. But that was really research. I think it was during Hurricane Joaquin in 2015 in South Carolina that I felt that environmental issues could impact people profoundly. In 2015, we collected water samples during and after the hurricane that has its own story to see how water quality may change. The results were shocking. Our research suggested that after hurricanes, drinking water may not be safe for weeks simply because years worth of carbon was flushed into river and system just in a few days. So naturally, we try to inform people and public with seminar series and interviews with public radio to increase awareness. And I myself have started to visit some of the impacted neighborhoods weeks after the hurricane, like 6 weeks, 8 weeks after the hurricane. And it was shocking that how low-income communities were impacted disproportionately. Not because rainfall even chose them, because of the infrastructure, because of the adaptation strategy or lack of adaptation strategy in low-income communities. And it's not only flooding in that area. I'm talking about Georgetown, South Carolina, all these other low-income communities. The same goes with other environmental issues such as air quality, wastewater discharge, and water quality. So although I'm spending a lot of time on research in topics related to environmental issues since 2010, it took me a hurricane really to understand how environmental issues can impact people.
Definitely. Like you said, it made it sort of personal, and like as far as the vulnerable communities are all too often subject to the impacts of those sort of natural disasters. So thank you for sharing that. Samantha, would you like to take it next?
So when I first heard this question, they sent the questions out via email. I was reading through it. My mind instantly flashed back to, I didn't jump back into agriculture because at top of mind was environmental impact. I jumped back into farming because that's what I was passionate about. But when you start to break that down, what came to mind when I first read the question last night was I have very vivid memories of riding in the tractor, planting corn with my dad, like little kid, sitting beside him in the tractor cab. And my mom taught us how to plant seeds in the garden and watch those plants grow. And through all of that, through all those experiences that my parents showed us as kids, they weren't harping on being good to the environment. They were telling us that we were here to care for God's land for the brief period of time that we get the opportunity to do so. And as we grew older, those lessons at the farm translated into environmental justice conversations in school and with other people in other industries. So even today, as I finished up my day, my 1.5-year-old nephew visited the farm and climbed up in the tractor with my dad, and they were harrowing. So we were just turning over the soil in what will become our vegetable garden this summer to incorporate the composted manure. So for me, it was that really simple process of something I've seen done for years, but knowing that I was coming to have this conversation with you all tonight, that represents everything we're talking about, right? Not only is it soil health and land preparation and taking care of the land, but it's preparing for the next generation. My nephew has no idea what he's doing other than gripping that tractor wheel tonight, right? And just living his best moment with a huge smile, ear to ear. But we're showing him that we have to take care of the land and that we have to put good in so that we can get good out of the land. And I think that that is truly where my interest in agriculture and its ties to environmental justice lie, is that it's not about me. It's not about all of us on this call tonight. It's about the next generation, whether they're born yet or not. Is that we have to make sure we do good because somebody did good, so we have the land that we have today.
I love that. To put in good to get good. I love that idea of being a part of something bigger, right? Like that is something that will continue on after you and was before. And so let's be good to the land we're on. Love that. So Kaitlin, would you like to take it too?
I don't know how to follow that. That was great. I in full disclosure, when Becca asked me to speak on the panel today, I sort of said, I would really love it if there was a farmer, because they really are the stewards of our land. And I feel like a poser talking about food and beverage and food production without having a farmer here. So thanks, Sam. I appreciate that. I think the question was sort of what got me involved. And I mentioned I grew up in Vermont and spent a lot of time outside. And I went to SNHU. And I think this is a story I like play in my mind over and over again. I was riding with some friends in a car, and one of them threw a plastic bottle out the window. And I had this sort of moment of like, who does that? Like, I just grew up in the state next door, but like there, the time that I spent outside had an effect on me. And they have this thing in Vermont called Green Up Day, and I would spend the whole day cleaning up trash on the side of the road. That's what Green Up Day is. It's in a couple weeks. And so I sort of had this moment where I said, like, why don't other people care the way I do? And I've sort of carried that with me, originally working for Marriott, really trying to focus on, even increasing the amount that we recycled or composted at the hotels, and still sort of feeling like I was struggling. Ultimately, I went back to school and received an MBA in sustainability from the University of Vermont, and was sort of introduced to the food lab, and they have sort of a system of collaborating and working with people and being inclusive and bringing people into the fold. And I guess that's sort of how I got where I am today.
Absolutely. And I feel the same rage when I see bottles or anything being flown out of people's cars. So I feel that as a very triggering.
I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I'm not.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your stories and sharing your sort of inspiration too, because I know those that are listening are feeling the inspiration as well. So at that, I'll kick it over to Becca.
Thank you. So we know that COVID-19 and the pandemic has had a huge impact on so much of our day-to-day lives. And I'm curious how the pandemic has impacted either the work that you're doing or perhaps the topic itself, what you see day-to-day, or any research that you've been doing that impacts the environment, sustainability, long-term impacts that maybe you are worried about because of the pandemic. Or maybe some positive things that have come about from this pandemic as well. I'm sure they exist. I just hear more about things that might make us a little worried. So I'd love to hear from each of you. Samantha, do you want to start first on this?
Sure. And since Kaitlin put it out there, we should also put it out there that the two of us were roommates at SNHU and both in the hospitality department. So that's how I got here tonight. But she said, hey, I suggested there to be a farmer and mentioned that, by the way, I know somebody. So here we are. But yeah, COVID-19 has had, like everybody, just a tremendous impact on our business and also on our industry. And I want you all to think back to late March and early April of 2020. The grocery stores were very, very scarce. And if you wanted to buy a hamburger or you wanted to buy pork, you couldn't find it. At least that's what we got told in our area. I'm from Massachusetts, and it was very, very scarce. So what COVID-19 showed me and the people in our community was that our local food infrastructure is extremely fragile. And I know Hamid mentioned infrastructure for water quality for the low-income people after the hurricane. And I think COVID-19 didn't care where income level was. You just couldn't get food. Now, as we began to see food, we could have a long conversation about food insecurities and income levels and things like that, but that's for another night. But COVID-19 certainly put some pressure on the farms. We had the product. Getting it through the supply chain, through the processing plants, packaging it out to retail was the challenge. There were environmental concerns about exactly what has been mentioned tonight too. You have wastewater regulations, you have animal safety regulations, land use regulations. You have all those things that even in a pandemic, you still have to follow. So I think that COVID-19 really just put the asterisk next to how fragile our infrastructure around the food system is. And on top of that, made us realize that New England has more people and more demand than the food that we grow and the food that we raise. So there's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle that, for me, being able to raise food here and then get it to people, that's a huge environmental impact because it's traveling less miles. It's not being processed in the Midwest and then trucked back here. And we need more of that. So we have to focus on our infrastructure. And then just to touch back on Kaitlin's story about the trash, with everybody at home, there's been more residential trash, and it sounds stupid. It sounds minuscule in the whole turn of events, but there has been so much more litter along the roadways in our area because of the trash trucks moving through the residential areas. I used to think it was a lot of people just chucking stuff out the window, but now we're seeing boxes and bags that they wouldn't fit through a car window. It's coming out of the trash trucks. And that's a concern to me, just as we move forward for when we start harvesting along those edges of the field, that trash can be a hazard, a physical hazard to our animals eating that feed. So just one of those things that I didn't even think of until you're driving home and you're going, where's that trash coming from? And like I said, it's minuscule in the whole big picture, but it's really influential in our food supply.
Thank you for sharing that. That is a good point. I would not have considered that, and what you do with all of the trash and where it is, who picks it up, as we're all home. And I'm definitely guilty of more online shopping than ever. What are we doing with a lot of the boxes that are coming through and the plastic that's a part of that? And we'll get a little bit later about what each of our roles is in that. So thank you. Hamed, do you mind going next?
Sure, yeah, we'll be happy to. First of all, I really enjoyed what Kaitlin and Samantha mentioned. I wish we had more people like that. When Samantha was talking about the environment, it was with love. It wasn't with fear, really. And that's a good thing. A lot of times when we talk about the environment, we talk about the fear. And I wonder how we can care about something that we truly do not love. So it's really great. Thank you. But talking about the impacts of COVID-19 on environmental science and environmental issues, well, there were both positive and negative impacts, I assume. We can mention reduction in carbon emissions. We see that anytime there is a challenge with the economy, we should see how prolonged that impact is going to be. But personally, I care a lot about poverty, hunger and public awareness when it comes to sustainability. Based on the data from the World Bank, the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed another 100 million people into extreme poverty in 2020, which is rising that number to 150 million. And that was not the general trend. For a couple of decades, the number of people in extreme poverty was declining. In fact, in the last 20 years, the number of people in extreme poverty declined by more than 90%. And yes, number of people in extreme poverty is declining. Sometimes we listen to the news and say, hey, things are bad and getting worse. Usually if we look at the data, that's not the case. And number of people in poverty is declining. And that was a great trend that COVID-19 suddenly started to changing it. So that's one of the major things that I worry about. And we need to do a lot of research. We need to do a lot of studies to see how we can get back on track. So it was a system that was about to work, now it's disrupted, and we need to take care of that. Public awareness, which we're going to talk about it a lot probably tonight, is an important thing too. I'm sure a lot of traditional outreach activities were stopped because of the COVID-19, but we have these online gatherings, remote gatherings. So we should see how that will work in the on the long run. And I think one thing that we'll learn from this, at least I hope decision makers learn about this, is that how the connection between people and scientists, people in science can be important when it comes to challenging situations. So that's one of the things that I'm optimistic about, that decision makers will pay a little bit more attention to outreach activities, pay a little bit attention to connection between science and people, which can potentially be a positive outcome in the long run.
Thank you. That's all really interesting to think about. I hope that the past year has taught us science can be a part of a lot of different areas that we can take advantage of. Kaitlin, go to you next.
Yeah, thanks to both Hamid and Samantha, because I think I don't have a lot to say besides one is I think it's pretty clear that we undervalue food in this, especially in the US. And so putting more value in paying farmers for local food, if you can afford local food, highly recommend. I think we'll get to maybe our advice later, but I'll start by saying that. And then public awareness has probably been, is in the sphere of what's been the hardest for me in my role. So at the Food Lab, we spend a lot of time trying to connect companies to farmers, creating spaces where they can learn from each other and create solutions that are good for everyone and the environment. And so we generally spend a lot of time traveling and getting to meet farmers and talking with them. And that's been really hard in the last year. In the US, it's easy, of course, to jump on a phone call or jump on a Zoom. It's still not as personal. But if we're thinking about a farmer in West Africa who's producing cocoa, or in South America producing coffee, it's almost impossible, to reach them. Even cooperative leaders or exporters, it's hard to have the connection that you would in person. And so that's been a difficult part of COVID.
Thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate the global perspective too, that I think we often forget as we're thinking of ourselves and what's happening here, and perhaps the long-term effects the pandemic will have all over, even as we move forward, what other countries might still be struggling with. So thank you. Chantel, you want to ask the next?
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah. So, in thinking about from each of your perspectives, thinking about the conversations, and we've talked about some of the pieces like the infrastructure, and thinking about just COVID-19 in general and like how it's impacted in terms of the last year. But what do you wish people kind of would continue to talk about when it comes to issues of the environment, or maybe conversations that we're already having that we could really need to continue to have from each of your perspectives? So like obviously knowing that you all sort of have different areas that you're sort of in your expertise or experience in, but what are those conversations that we just need to make sure we're continuing to talk about? So Kaitlin, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it before, and that's just the value, putting more value on food. And I'm not going to say I'm perfect, right? In this sense, But trying to prioritize the amount of money, reprioritize the amount of money that it's a goal of mine to reprioritize the amount of money that I spend on food that is local if possible. Unfortunately, you can't get coffee in Vermont, or, so then thinking about what organizations are selling products in a way that I support, and whether that's, and I think that to me both includes environmentally and socially. So farmers are getting paid a fair, or what we call living income, and they're producing a product using, sustainable practices.
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's like you said, thinking about intentionality of like, where is this coming from? Do I agree with how it got to wherever it is in my hands? So that's such an important point. I'm glad you brought that up. So thank you.
And it's a journey. It's a journey. No one should feel blamed or ashamed here. Like it's a journey that I think we're all probably on, hopefully.
Such an important consideration, right? Giving yourself some grace to know that that's going to take some time. Sam, would you like to take it next?
Sure. I guess I have to reiterate that we raise beef and dairy at our farm, and that's something I wish people talked more about. Is oftentimes when the environment gets mentioned, people aren't quick to say, hey, I raise beef and dairy. And yeah, I'd shout it from the rooftops. I'm not afraid of that conversation, because dairy farmers and beef farmers are doing amazing things for the environment, for their environmental impacts across our country. And I think that needs to be said, echoing everything that Kaitlin just said too, about trying your best to make that decision. And here in the United States, those decisions regarding our food, we have an incredibly safe food system because of our regulation. But on top of that, there's been so much effort put into environmental stewardship from both the beef and dairy side as well. I'm not as familiar because our vegetable operation at our farm is much smaller to scale. But I think there's also some incredible work being done by produce farmers throughout the United States. I heard a piece recently from the Southwest, and they're experiencing the effects of the mega drought right now, which goes right back to your water access. And for me, that kind of scares me as to how much produce comes out of that area in through Arizona and the lower part of California. We have some serious issues that we're going to have to face as consumers coming up, because so much of our food does come from that area. But the farmers in that region are doing magnificent things to maximize the impact of the water that they are using. And that is so incredibly important.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's something that you, like you said, is not the top of your awareness when you're thinking about sort of the beef and produce and dairy. So absolutely. So thank you.
I think people are quick to point the finger, and to Kaitlin's credit and the organization that she works with, they're very fast to say, no, we need farmers to be part of that conversation. And I just, I'm appreciative of everybody that has that attitude, that farmers, we don't need to be blamed for things. We can just be part of the solution together, because we need this land too.
Exactly. Sort of trying to figure out how to row together, right? All right, Mohammed, would you like to kick us off at the end here?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So, yeah, before I respond to your question, I want to get back what Kaitlin mentioned, which is spending money on local food, which is such an important thing, right? So, when you're using local food, there is no transportation. No transportation means lower carbon footprint, because transportation usually use fossil fuels. Means lower water footprint, because production of that fossil fuel to run that transportation requires water. So you're using less water and a less fossil fuel just by consuming local food. And sometimes, yes, this local food is cost more. And which reminds me of something that I had experienced. I've used these LEDs to reduce the cost of electricity in my home, and it declined significantly. And I was really happy about it. And one day my friend came and told me, hey, what did you use that money for? And I was ashamed to say, hey, I spent that money for a air trip. So technically, I've saved the environment, saved the money, and then destroyed the environment. So technically, I should have used that money to spend on a local food or on organic food or something like that that could have helped the environment, which made me think that, hey, living greener is not that simple. Just by installing an LED in my home, I simply don't turn to become a greener person. But getting back to your question, what I expect to hear from the people, it's not really general public. It's scientists, decision makers, universities, finding agencies that I help to change their approach and conversation. We need to provide people with reliable, trustworthy information that can come from science-based outreach activities. When I say outreach activities, means we simply turn science to something that can be understandable for general public. We need outreach to activate the research. And our university have many requirements for research. Maybe they need to have some requirements for outreach. The same goes for funding agencies. I don't see medical doctors or nutritionists argue with people that, hey, cancer is real, you should not have that fries. They provide the information with no expectations and judgment. And maybe we need to do the same thing. Human behavior does not change over time, does not change overnight. It requires some time, information, and education.
So important. Thank you so much. And back to your, when you were mentioning about like what Kaitlin had mentioned, is that going back to grace, right? Is thinking like, I'm trying, and then having the reflection of like, I missed the mark there a little, and just pivoting and figuring that out. So absolutely. Thank you all so much. So I'll kick it over to Becca for our next question.
All of your answers lead very well into this next question, I think. What advice would you give to those of us joining tonight who are looking to get involved in helping with the environment, environmental justice, sustainability? How would you recommend that they get started maybe to learn more? Are there any resources that you would recommend to them? Or we talked about like it's slow and steady, starting with small things that you can do yourself. Where would you recommend that someone get started? And I apologize. This is totally the part where I forget who I picked on first last time, so I apologize. But Samantha, do you mind going first?
Sure. So my advice would just be to start small. You don't have to leave this conversation tonight and go save the world. If you do, fantastic. And then this conversation had a way bigger impact than we even thought was possible. But just start small. Pick one thing that is going to kind of stick out to you. If that's, taking Kaitlin's advice and allocating just $5 more a week or a month or whatever's doable to shopping locally. Maybe you're not even going to allocate. You're just going to say, you know what, I'm just going to go and visit. I'm going to look on Google and find a local farm. Do your homework for sure to make sure that you know what that farm stands for and that they're legit. And they're just as dedicated as what you're looking for, kind of to Hamed's point about kind of where he fell into that he thought he was saving and then, oh, wait a minute, I could have spent differently. So just kind of picking on those little things, or just something as simple as back to our trash conversation, making sure that that Amazon shipment box that came to your house actually fits in the garbage can and isn't going to just blow away when you leave. I have a neighbor that's wicked bad at that. And for me, I could probably just stop by someday and say, hey, you really need to be better at this because we've picked it up too many times. We can work together. And I think you should all be commended for taking that small step tonight by attending this conversation, because we just need to have more conversations too. These conversations can be motivators, they can be informative. And just by having that conversation, we've kind of already started down that path of doing one more thing that's better.
That's awesome. Thank you for saying that. And I like your point about having some of these conversations. I know they can be hard to talk to your neighbor about or your friends and family, but there is a nice way to go about it. The difference of your neighbor probably doesn't even, they think they're throwing it out and think like they're handling their trash, but there's more that could be.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, when we say the words environmental justice, we almost get that knot in our stomach because, oh my gosh, this is going to get political. And we hopefully have a few more minutes to avoid it. But so far tonight, this conversation hasn't been political. It's you and me as humans.
That is a very good point. Thank you. I think that's important to recognize that there is a way to keep it in the middle and keep it about like what can we all do as individuals to make a big impact. So thank you. Hamed?
Well, yeah, I totally agree with Samantha that the people can start really with activities that they can enjoy. We all know what are some of the environmental issues around us, right? One may enjoy volunteering for food bank. That's great. Might be volunteer for the vaccination center. Better than that, one may start a TED Circle or a book club to encourage people to read more about topics related to environmental science. Like when we think about environmental justice issues, a lot of time it's lack of awareness. Take air quality issues. A lot of factories that are polluting non-source pollutants that potentially can be hazardous to human health. They are in the close proximity of low-income communities. Well, it doesn't mean that there are not factories around other communities. Yes, they are, but they're afraid of being sued, so they use appropriate filters. So if you can simply increase awareness in such communities, if you can increase education in such communities, you can naturally improve environmental justice issues. So again, yeah, we can start with things that we enjoy. I really don't have any advice, but I can say what I'm doing these days. I'm focused on surface runoff, which is the rainwater that does not infiltrate in the soil, flows on the surface and washes away and carries all these pollutants to nearby water bodies. I invite neighbors to have rain barrels, or I try to invite them to have local vegetation and native vegetation instead of urban turfs. So I'm trying to contribute to the environment in that way in my community. But as I mentioned, I think everybody should start the process by doing things that they can enjoy, really.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that and sharing a little bit more about some of the work that you're doing as well. Kaitlin, do you have any advice for people on how to get started here?
Yeah, there's a world of information, podcasts, and things to read. I would just sort of echo Hamed's note about expanding sort of your viewpoint if you can, and volunteering maybe in a community that's not like yours, a low-income community, and getting to experience sort of the world that might be theirs every day. And as Hamed mentioned, we sometimes, or a lot of the times, those who are living in low-income areas are affected the most by by environmental injustices. And then I may be jumping the gun on this, but if you're already I think maybe some people here might be environmentalists already, and I think something that I'm really passionate about is education. And I'll just sort of have a shout out to become a mentor if you have the time. I'm part of sort of we don't have big brothers, big sisters in my area, but it's a mentoring partnership similar. And I've just really gotten to enjoy spending time with my mentee, gardening this past summer, and going on hikes and exposing her to nature, because as we've talked about before, a lot of times those of us who care and love the environment learned that at a young age. And so that's like a really fun and simple way that you can sort of pass along your interest in the environment.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I think that's very full circle for yourself and for where we started this conversation of where your passion started, and if we can help more people in the generations after us to have that same interest. Like Samantha said, it's not too late for us to be making a lot of changes that will pay off later. So thank you, all of you, for sharing that. I'm gonna hand it to Chantel, and I think we're gonna move into kind of the last part of our session.
Yes, absolutely. So at this point, we'll transition to some of the Q&A pieces. So I know some of you that are attending tonight have submitted some questions, so thank you. And we'll take some of the Q&As as well as we have time to. So we'll do our best to answer as many as we can in the remaining 15 minutes or so. So one of the questions that we wanted to make sure we had time for is a really good one, and something you all have kind of mentioned. You know, we talked a lot about awareness and education, and the fact that sort of like all of us in this space, you know, really do feel compelled to help in some way, right? So I guess in your perspectives, what are some ways we can communicate with those that have no interest in environmental issues that could potentially get involved, just to help them see that they're significant? Because I think that's a challenge, right? And thinking about what we sort of have control of, and to try to have those conversations. So what are some of those ways, I guess, would you sort of, in your opinions? So Samantha, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. If it's just a conversation that you're having in person, kind of like any conversation where you don't see eye to eye with somebody, pick out something that connects you. For me, I've kind of latched onto that, you know, and I apologize if this sounds kind of gruesome, but you know, life and death is a part of my world at the farm. Whether it be the life cycles of the plants or the animals, or of humans. You know, my time's going to end. I'm still pretty young, but my time's going to come to an end, and I need to commit my life to making sure that I leave an opportunity for somebody else. And so when I talk to people about agriculture and environmental issues, I'm not talking about me and them. I'm asking, you know, about their grandkids or their kids, maybe nieces or nephews. Remember, I said I have a 1.5-year-old nephew, and he's the cutest little thing. And I was fortunate enough to see I have 4 other nieces and nephews who live out in New York, and they're fortunate enough to live on a farm that when I connect with people, whether it be in person or on social media, I try to show them just family. So many people can connect over family, because even if it's not a blood family, we all have people we're connected to, like Kaitlin mentioned. You know, that mentoring relationship is so important that you can connect. And I choose my connection usually to be family. If family fails to kind of hit that nerve, all of the milk from our cows goes to Cabot for cheese and butter products. So I usually then try to just go in for cheese for the win. And that usually works, because people love to talk about food. So I think that if people aren't connecting over the environment, find a company that raises or produces a product that you love and you want to share how good they are. And Cabot, being a Vermont company, is so incredibly committed to the environment that if family fails, I go for cheese.
And you'd get me in both of those things. So I have a feeling that we would have a lot more in common than that too, but I love that. And I think, like you said, is just finding that commonality, right? To talk as humans, to talk as one, you know, part of, you know, we're all on the same planet here. So let's try to find something that we can work together on. So I love that. Kaitlin, would you like to take it next?
I don't think I have much to add besides, I mean, yeah, besides food, people, you know, if somebody doesn't even like food, especially if they don't like dairy, which I can't imagine, but no, just kidding. You know, who doesn't like to go to the beach or like, you know, see a beautiful waterway, and just thinking about that, I think everybody has a local spot that they are connected to in some way. And so, yeah, just echoing the, you know, the human connections are so important.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you spoke to too was, I love the you know, the encouragement of also maybe getting involved in a neighborhood that you don't necessarily live in, right? Because I think, Hamid, you also mentioned like it brings in the personal part, right? Is to be able to see what's happening in those other spaces where it's just not in your bubble. So it's not in your face, and you're not, you know, being able to put humans behind what's happening, or what could be happening. So I appreciate those pieces too. So, and Hamid, would you like to finish this off?
Sure, yeah. I mean, this is an interesting question, and I get it a lot in my classes. Like, my students come to me and, hey, my father is a climate change denier. What should I do? And my answer is just nothing. Go for a hike. To just go and enjoy the environment. We don't have to convince the people to believe in part of the science or don't. If they are decision makers, that's the whole another story. If they are decision makers, yeah, try to vote for somebody else. Better than that, try to run yourself. That would be great. But I mean, if it's your family, it's friends, we don't have to believe in the same things, especially when it comes to science. You know, one of the things that was repeated and repeated again tonight was love of the environment. If you love the environment, if you love the food, if you love the beaches, if you love the forests, you're naturally gonna act in a way that would not harm them, or even better, it's gonna save them. There's this famous soul scientist who said, one of the most dangerous things is that you believe your food is coming from a supermarket, not knowing about the water that is required, not knowing about the soil, not knowing about the erosion. So if people just go and visit Samantha's farm, if people go and hike, if people go and visit the forest, I think that would be great.
Just get out there, right?
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, like you said, you're infusing your love of the environment too. I know when I'm around my outdoorsy friends, we all, you know, we can feel that. So, but I acknowledge that I'm also someone that likes to be barefoot. So I appreciate that. Awesome. So I'll pass it on to Becca to ask our next question.
Awesome, thank you. This one just came in, so we alluded to it, and I apologize if it's putting you guys on the spot, but someone who is interested in this topic, do you have a podcast or a book or someone you look up to, videos on YouTube, a researcher who's just really in the field, something that you would recommend for someone who wants to learn more, for where to start? And Hamed, can I ask you this one first?
Sure, absolutely. TED Talks are generally interesting. You watch any topic in TED, it's interesting, especially in environmental science. I'm not saying it because it's my major, but talks related to environmental science are magnificent. One of them is talking about how increasing soil carbon storage by only 4% can combat the climate change. Besides TED Talks, the National Geographic has tons of super amazing documentaries. Under the Seas, talking about sea level rise, how it might impact cities like New York or New Orleans. That one is great. What else? There are tons of documentaries again on Netflix. Podcasts, I need to check my phone. What I'll do, I'll check my phone, remember the names, and I'll respond to that at the end of this. There you go.
Perfect, thank you. And also for Samantha and Kaitlin, if you guys think of anything later to share out, let us know. We can put it on our website or send it out in the follow-up email that's going out, because these are great resources for people to have. So thank you. Kaitlin.
I was looking at my phone and I was just deciding, NPR just has created this sort of life kit, if you haven't listened to these podcasts, and they're about everything in life, but there are a lot of them about the environment or making small habit changes. And so that's sort of a good resource. The resource I've really enjoyed at sort of a cross-section of social and environmental justice is Civil Eats. So they produce just sort of news articles on indigenous farming and regenerative agriculture, those types of things, giving different perspectives, which has been really great during the last year.
That's awesome, thank you. Samantha?
Sure, so I really like the work that's coming out of the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. We have a stewardship commitment, and that kind of ties in the producers and the processors, and kind of as the name implies, the Innovation Center seeks to keep moving U.S. dairy in a forward direction. And through their stewardship commitment, they've really taken this idea of being better, taking it by the horns, and they're just going to wrangle it. And there's talk out there in the industry of kind of this carbon neutral dairy farm idea. And I think that's something that, at least in my lifetime, we're probably going to see, and realizing the work that's going into that to make resources available for farmers. But on top of that, I'm not good with podcasts, so I have to admit to that one. I look at a lot at Instagram because there's so many farmers across the United States that are on Instagram, and they're easy to find. They're becoming what we call advocates. They're out there telling their stories every single day, and there is no better way to find out who's doing amazing things and innovative things than the people that are getting their hands dirty, doing it every single day. So there's a farmer out in the Salinas Valley, California. He's sharing photos, just gorgeous photos from the harvests that occur out there, and you can see the work. He shares a lot of photos about the workforce and some of the protective measures that they take to ensure the safety of our food. And that's food that's ending up in our grocery stores right here in New England. And then there's a couple of people in the Midwest that are sharing their story, and they talk about GMOs and pesticide use openly on their Instagram profiles to help the public understand. And I love when we get conversations at our farm that it's not something that we do at our farm, that I can turn around and say, hey, I follow this farmer and I saw that they do this at their farm, to be able to have that resource. So I'm not big on the podcast, but I really like Instagram because it's people sharing photos out there of their day and videos.
That's awesome. Thank you. That will help me maybe use my Instagram habits for better research purposes now. So you're reframing it for me. Thank you. I'm going to give it to Chantel to, I think, probably wrap our session up.
Can't believe it, but we're already at 8:28, if you can believe it. So Kaitlin, Sam, and thank you so much. We just appreciate your time and sharing so much with all of us, and the work that you do every day is inspiring. And thank you for all of your advice and, just your experiences. We just really appreciate your time tonight. And if people want to stay connected with you, I mentioned in the beginning, let me go ahead and share this with you all. You can find our panelists, our fabulous panelists, on LinkedIn. So you should be able to see that right now. So you can go ahead and search for them. You'll also find the contact information for Becca and myself if you have any Global Days of Service questions. And with that, our time has come to an end. So on behalf of Becca and I and the Offices of Alumni and Online Engagement, just thank you to our presenters for all the important work you do and spending your evening with us. And thank you to all of you who are attending tonight with your time and engagement. And thank you to Media Services who's supporting in the back end with this event this evening as well. And just a little PSA, so we hope that you'll join us tomorrow on Earth Day. Very fitting. At 8 p.m. we have a virtual event for Global Days of Service on sustainability at home, and that's at 8 p.m. And you can find that on our SNHU website here. It's the Global Days of Service website for all the event details, as well as all the other amazing ways that you can get involved this month for environmental justice and environmental topics. And we just hope to see you all in next month's panel featuring some pandemic essential workers, which you'll also see on the website. So thank you all so much. We appreciate you, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.